I read all 18 human studies of NMN supplements to figure out if there are any proven benefits. This took many hours of work, but it was so worth it because I found 4 key takeaways. Plus, at the end, I'll share what I do regarding NMN supplements after looking at all of these studies. The excitement for NMN supplements accelerated when David Sinclair, a professor at Harvard, appeared on the Joe Rogan Experience over 5 years ago.
So I take NMN every morning.
What is NMN?
Good question.
The excitement was not about lifespan extension. There wasn't a single NMN mouse study examining lifespan at that stage. Instead, a 12-month-long study of inbred mice in 2016 suggested that NMN supplements effectively slow down the age-associated decline in mice. So the NMN-treated mice appeared to have greater muscle performance and movement. That's what was so exciting, that maybe by using NMN supplements, humans could also have improved energy levels, muscle performance, and resiliency against disease. But it's important to note that there wasn't a single NMN human study published when David Sinclair appeared on the Joe Rogan Experience. It was very, very early on the research journey. The first human study was published a year later, in February 2020. But despite the lack of human research, many people made the decision to start taking NMN supplements based on the exciting mice studies. So what's happened since that Sinclair-Joe Rogan interview? We'll start by covering 3 important mice studies and then go through the human trials. In 2021, a very similar molecule to NMN, called NR, was tested by the Meticulous Interventions Testing Program. This program is the creme de la creme of mice research. Instead of using inbred mice, this program uses genetically diverse mice, so the results are far more applicable to humans. Plus, the same experiments are run at 3 separate labs at the same time, making sure that the results are true and reproducible. But there was no lifespan extension seen. The second notable study was published in December last year. It was a study of inbred mice that's currently undergoing peer review, but just like the 2016 paper that we looked at, it suggests that NMN-treated mice delay the onset of frailty in both males and females. But interestingly, there was a lifespan extension seen of 8.5% in the female mice, not male mice. Finally, a 2024 study looked at mice who were genetically altered to have accelerated aging, and again, there was a lifespan extension effect seen. So hopefully, the interventions testing program will also trial NMN, just like they did NR, but given the existing disappointing NR results, I'm not particularly hopeful of a lifespan extension effect. Overall, the mice research still suggests that there's a lot of hope that NMN can help slow down the age-related decline, even if NMN doesn't increase lifespan. That leads us nicely into looking at the NMN human research. Now remember, the hope is that NMN will improve muscle performance, help us become more resilient against illness and infection, boost energy levels, and improve measures of metabolic health, such as insulin sensitivity. So how do we work out if NMN works in humans? Because if you look at the review section of NMN supplement companies, the reviews are amazing. Other people on social media will sing NMN's praises, saying that it improves their energy levels and muscle function. So why do we need clinical trials when customer reviews of NMN supplements are wonderful? Well, there's a powerful effect known as the placebo effect, where a person experiences an actual improvement in their health, despite the fact that the treatment has no effect on the body. One of the best examples of this is a study that looked at the combination of glucosamine and chondroitin supplements for knee arthritis. In the glucosamine and chondroitin group, roughly 60% of them experienced a significant improvement in their pain, which sounds wonderful. The only problem was that the group who received the placebo or the dummy medication, 60% of them also experienced a marked improvement in their pain. This is why the clinical guidelines don't recommend glucosamine and chondroitin supplements for knee arthritis, because those supplements are no better than a placebo. And that's a perfect example of why randomized clinical trials are done, to figure out if there's a true benefit from treatment or whether it's just a placebo effect. So let's go through the 18 human studies and figure out if there's strong evidence of benefit beyond a placebo, like creatine supplements, for example. Now, whenever testing a supplement, we first start with safety, and that's the first takeaway. NMN supplements appear safe over the short term. So all 18 NMN studies were short-term studies. They lasted a few months, and there were no significant safety concerns in any of them. But we're going to come back to safety later in the video because some new research has come out. Of the 18 studies, 4 of them were not randomized controlled trials, so remember, we're trying to figure out if there's an improvement beyond a placebo, so in this analysis I've excluded those studies. The next point is whether NMN supplements increase blood NAD. So NAD is central to our metabolism, and the idea behind supplementing with NMN is to support and increase NAD. Now, all of the studies that measured blood NAD showed that yes, NMN supplements improve blood NAD, so things are looking good so far. But it's not only blood NAD that we want to support. We also want to support muscle NAD and hopefully improve muscle performance. That was one of the big hopes from the mice studies. There was only one study that took muscle biopsies and measured the NAD content, and unfortunately, the muscle NAD content did not change despite NMN supplements. That's a very disappointing finding, and it's the same for NR supplements, which I mentioned earlier in the video. A 2020 study also found that NR does not increase muscle NAD. Remember, NMN supplements are taken to support NAD levels, so if NMN supplements aren't increasing muscle NAD, can they really be expected to improve muscle performance? And that leads us on to the next question. Do our muscles need that extra NAD support? Because in February 2022, a human study showed that older adults who exercised had a similar muscle NAD level compared to younger adults, and it was only when the older adults didn't exercise that they had lower muscle NAD. So it's likely that just through a healthy diet and regular exercise, we can support our muscle NAD levels. But coming back to NMN supplements, maybe they work via a different mechanism to improve muscle function, and multiple human studies looked at this. Across the human studies, there were 16 different measures of fitness and muscle performance. 12 measures showed no improvement beyond a placebo. 3 did suggest a benefit, and 1 measure was incredibly controversial, so let's spend a bit of time on that one. The controversy comes from the 10th NMN human study, which was performed in India. That study suggested that the groups who took NMN supplements could walk significantly further during the 6-minute walking test compared to the placebo group. But looking at the raw data, something really odd was going on. These people were middle-aged, but they had such a slow walking speed to the point where it looked like they were 80-year-olds. Because of these strange numbers, the results were struck down by other researchers in this space, such as Professor Matt Kaberlein. The graphs also appear to be a bit too perfect, so we don't know exactly how to interpret these results. Overall, when it comes to NMN supplementation and muscle performance, most of the measures show no improvement, so that's the second out of 4 takeaways. There's a possible improvement from NMN supplements regarding muscle performance, but it's unlikely based on the human research we have so far. One final point on exercise. The 17th NMN study, which was an observational study, suggested that blood NAD levels can go up via exercise. So it's likely that both our blood and muscle NAD levels will be absolutely fine, so long as we have a healthy diet and regularly exercise. The next hope from the mice studies was that NMN supplements can improve our metabolic health. Looking at the markers of metabolic health, such as body composition, LDL cholesterol, insulin, and glucose, just like the muscle performance measures, most of the metabolic measures showed no effect from NMN supplements. Out of the 28 measures across the various studies, 23 showed no effect. 1 measurement showed worsening of insulin, and only 4 showed a benefit, with one of those measures being extremely odd. In the 6th NMN study, the placebo group worsened their insulin sensitivity by 30% over the 60-day trial period. So what on earth were they doing to worsen their health by that much in 60 days? It's very difficult to interpret these results then, because if you compare that worsening of insulin sensitivity to the NMN group, where the insulin sensitivity didn't change, you can be tricked into thinking that NMN improves insulin sensitivity, when in reality, these results are uninterpretable. So be careful when you go through these studies like this. So will NMN supplements improve our metabolic health? Well, it's not overly convincing based on the trials we have so far, and that's the third out of the 4 takeaways. There's a possible metabolic benefit, but it's unlikely. Moving forward, one study looked at sleep and fatigue, and when reading these studies, here's another classic example of being aware of trickery. So remember, we need to compare to the placebo. It's exactly the same at looking at fatigue scores. There was improvements in every group, so there was no difference between the different groups. So you can't just rely on what the abstract or summaries of these studies say. You have to look at the raw numbers, and you need to make sure that the groups are being compared against one another. Now, many of the reviews of NMN will say that there's a significant improvement in energy levels. So well-being and energy levels were measured in 3 studies. 2 showed no improvement, and the one study that did show an improvement is one of the papers that we've already gone through that's got some issues, so that was the 10th NMN study. There were no improvements in hearing and cognition, and the final measure was arterial stiffness or blood vessel stiffness. One study showed no effect, and the other showed a trend towards improvement, but this didn't reach statistical significance. So before we address safety again, looking at the overall table that combines the current NMN human studies together, most measures show no effect beyond a placebo. Compare this to creatine supplements, for example, where study after study shows an improvement in exercise performance compared to a placebo. Plus, from the observational human studies, it appears that both our blood and muscle NAD levels will be absolutely fine if we regularly exercise. So what am I going to do regarding NMN supplements considering these studies? And then we'll get to the 4th takeaway. Well, some of the preclinical mice studies are intriguing, and NMN is a form of vitamin B3. So when I designed microvitamin, I elected to have a higher dose of vitamin B3 of 50 milligrams because of those exciting preclinical studies. But just because I'm taking a supplement does not in any way mean that you should as well. Now, for context, the recommended daily intake of vitamin B3 is 16 milligrams. So I'm taking 313% of the recommended daily intake, but I would not want to take more than 50 milligrams of vitamin B3. We do have evidence from a meta-analysis in 2018 that high doses of vitamin B3 in the form of niacin, so between 1 to 3 grams a day, increased mortality or death rates by 10%. This is very different to the mice studies because mice typically don't die of cardiovascular disease. Instead, they die of other causes, such as cancer. For humans, however, cardiovascular disease is the #1 killer. Most NMN supplement companies suggest dosing with 1,000 milligrams, which is 6,250% of the recommended daily intake. And that's a problem because from the mice research, and this hasn't been done yet in humans, most of the NMN is converted into niacin by the gut microbiome and then absorbed. So it's possible that by taking these extraordinarily high doses of vitamin B3, you might be doing damage. Particularly when considering that a new study came out this year suggesting that when there's excessive vitamin B3, metabolites called 2-PY and 4-PY go up. Those metabolites appear to worsen blood vessel inflammation and may explain why high-dose vitamin B3 in the form of niacin appears to increase death rates. The authors note that it's all forms of vitamin B3 that increase these metabolites, including NMN and NR. Overall, there's limited evidence that NMN supplements offer benefits beyond a placebo. Over the short term, NMN supplements appear to be safe, but over the long term, there's a concern. And that's the 4th takeaway. There are safety concerns with NMN supplements over the long term. And until we have that long-term research, I would not supplement with vitamin B3 in any form beyond 50 milligrams. Instead, we should be focusing on exercise. So check out this video here that explains how I built the perfect home gym for only $250.